I stared at the documents and felt a sickening clarity wash over me as the truth became undeniable. My name is Brody Carson, and I'm 37 years old. Each morning I wake in an empty house that once held promises. When my wife Thalia slid divorce papers across our kitchen table claiming she couldn't live poor anymore, the bitter scent of burnt coffee hanging in the air, my software company's $150 million acquisition had finalized just days earlier. Information I had deliberately withheld to test who truly stood beside me. My attorney Calvin Brooks had confirmed the sale that same week. What I thought was a marriage built on partnership was merely a performance for Thalia, who quickly moved on with Blake Anderson, her personal trainer, once she believed I had nothing left to offer. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. I pushed through the office door just after 11, my shoulders tense after another 14-hour coding sprint. The porch light cast long shadows across our lawn, illuminating the unfamiliar sedan parked behind Thalia's SUV. Something felt off. The house was too quiet, too still for this hour. Thalia usually watched those dramatic hospital shows with the volume cranked. The kitchen light spilled into the hallway as I dropped my laptop bag by the coat rack. That's when I heard the murmur of voices. Not just Thalia's, but another woman's, low and professional sounding. I rounded the corner and stopped cold. Thalia sat at our kitchen table, back straight, fingers laced together like she was conducting an interview. Beside her sat a woman in a charcoal suit, sleek dark hair framing a face that looked perpetually disappointed. Between them lay a thick manila envelope. "Hey," I said, the word hanging awkwardly. "Didn't know we had company." Thalia didn't smile. "This is Paige Nolan, my attorney." My stomach dropped. I'd heard that name before. The shark who'd taken half of our neighbor's dental practice in his divorce. "Sign it," Thalia said, sliding the envelope toward me, her wedding ring catching the overhead light. "I've made my decision." I stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. "What decision?" "I can't do this anymore, Brody." Her voice was rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech in the mirror. "I can't live poor anymore, waiting for someday. We're just incompatible." The word landed like a slap. 7 years of marriage reduced to a PR statement. Paige Nolan cleared her throat. "Mrs. Carson is seeking an equitable division of assets, including the SUV and spousal support commensurate with your lifestyle." Her tone suggested this was a generous offer. "The prenuptial agreement allows for significant adjustment given the duration of the marriage." I almost laughed. Our lifestyle was a modest 2-bedroom with a creaky porch swing that I'd promised to fix for 3 summers running. Our vacations were weekend drives to the coast. The SUV was the only luxury we'd allowed ourselves, and I'd spent weeks comparing prices before buying it. "Does this arrangement need to involve lawyers at midnight?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. That's when I noticed movement in the doorway. Blake Anderson leaned against the frame, muscled arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The gym manager, Thalia's friend who'd been texting her at odd hours for weeks. The picture suddenly came into sharp focus. I remembered the night Thalia had come home late from a training session, smelling like expensive cologne, the new workout clothes that appeared in her drawer, the sudden criticism of my long work hours. It all made sense now. "You brought him here?" I asked quietly. Thalia flushed, but didn't deny it. "Blake is supporting me through this." I looked between them, my wife, her lover, and the attorney they'd brought to ambush me. 7 years of building something together, and this was how it ended. I could have shouted, could have thrown Blake out, could have reminded Thalia of every promise we'd made. But what was the point? You can't force someone to love you, you can't argue someone into loyalty. "If this is what you want," I said evenly, "you'll have it." I took the envelope and turned toward our bedroom, leaving them sitting in surprised silence. They'd expected a scene. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. That night I lay awake, staring at the envelope on the nightstand. Outside rain tapped against the window as I replayed every dismissive comment Thalia had made about NovaWorks, my hobby company that I'd built from nothing in our garage. "It's cute that you're still coding," she'd said last month. But when are you going to get a real job? She never understood what I was building, never believed in the vision. While I worked 16-hour days, she'd grown restless, impatient for the rewards without witnessing the struggle. Morning light eventually crept through the blinds. I signed the papers without reading them, placed the pen beside my signature, and whispered, "You'll regret this, Thalia." In the kitchen, the coffee maker hissed and sputtered as I set the envelope on the table. Thalia was still asleep. In the guest room, I assumed. I poured a cup, watching steam curl into the air. By afternoon, I'd packed a small bag and placed the signed envelope near the front door for courier pickup. My hands were steady, my face blank as I programmed the courier's number into my phone. Then my phone pinged with a text. "Blake. Good luck, champ." I stared at the message, feeling something cold settle in my chest. The smug confidence, the casual cruelty. When I opened the front door to wait for the courier, something caught my eye. There on our welcome mat lay Blake Anderson's gym key tag, a deliberate message. He'd been inside our home before. Many times, perhaps. I backed out of the driveway early the next morning, the sun barely cracking the horizon. The manila envelope sat in the passenger seat, reflecting orange light. Our street was empty, just how I wanted it. No neighbors to witness the collapse of my marriage. No awkward waves or pitying looks. My office was nothing special. A converted warehouse space with exposed brick and questionable heating. The team wouldn't arrive for hours. That was the point. I needed the quiet. I placed the envelope by the front door for courier pickup, then settled at my desk. The computer hummed to life, its blue glow illuminating the dim space. Lines of code filled the screen, the backbone of NovaWorks, my hobby that was about to change everything. My phone vibrated. "Beatrice, you actually signed them?" Her voice was tight with disbelief. "Brody, what the hell?" "Good morning to you too," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Don't good morning me. Thalia called Mom. She said you just gave up. No fight, no conversation, nothing." I closed my eyes. That's rich. She ambushed me with divorce papers and her gym boyfriend, but somehow I'm the one who didn't communicate. Her what? Beatrice's tone shifted from accusatory to murderous. That's the guy who's been texting her? The one she swore was just a friend? Blake Anderson. In the flesh. Standing in our doorway while she explained how poor we are. Beatrice exhaled sharply. "Can't you contest this? Talk to a lawyer?" "I mean, this is clearly, it's done, B." I cut her off, my voice steady. "The decision is final. This isn't like you, Brody. You don't just roll over." I smiled faintly at the monitor, where the NovaWorks logo pulsed in the corner of my screen. Trust me, I'm not. 2 days later, I was reviewing specs when Calvin's email arrived. The subject line read simply, "Confirmed." I opened it with steady hands. "Brody, all documents have been executed. The sale is officially closed. Funds have cleared and are deposited as directed into the designated accounts. Congratulations. Let me know when you want to discuss next steps." Calvin, $150 million. After taxes and obligations, my stake was worth more than I'd ever dreamed possible. The years of 18-hour days, the missed holidays, the constant hustle, it had all paid off. And Thalia had walked away just days before the finish line. I drove to Lake Mercer that evening, Onyx panting happily in the passenger seat. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the water with streaks of gold and crimson. I parked at the overlook and sat on the hood, Onyx settling beside me. His warm body pressed against my side as I took my first deep, full breath in what felt like days. "You're the only one who stuck around, boy," I said, scratching behind his ears. Onyx nudged my elbow with his nose, his amber eyes fixed on mine with unwavering loyalty. The irony wasn't lost on me. 7 years with Thalia, and I was more devastated by the thought of losing my dog than my wife. Later that week, I walked into Paige Nolan's chrome and glass office to finalize the divorce. Thalia wasn't there. Apparently, she'd already completed her portion. Convenient. "Just these forms," Paige said, sliding papers across the polished table. No small talk, no sympathy. All business. Standard acknowledgments of receipt, waiver of further proceedings. I signed each page without comment, aware of Paige's analytical gaze. She was searching for weakness, for hesitation. I offered neither. I assume we won't need any further interaction, I said, capping my pen. That depends on you, she replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. Divorce can be complicated, only when people make it that way. Back home I fed Onyx, then began the systematic dismantling of my married life. I stacked framed photos into a cardboard box, Thalia and me on our honeymoon in Maui. At my cousin's wedding, laughing on the back deck with friends who would now choose sides. I deleted Thalia's number from my phone, removed her from my emergency contacts, archived our digital wedding album. 7 years of memories compressed and contained in less than an hour. At my kitchen table with Onyx asleep at my feet, I opened my laptop one last time that night. An email notification appeared. Final decree of divorce granted. Just like that. It was done. The marriage that began with promises and champagne toasts ended with a court filing and a digital timestamp. I closed the laptop and stroked Onyx's head. Now it begins, I whispered. My phone lit up with a notification. An unread voicemail from an unknown number, timestamped exactly 5 minutes after the decree had been granted. 1 week later, I sat at my kitchen island scrolling through my newsfeed when the headline appeared. Nova Works acquired for $150 million. The story outlined how our innovative integration solutions had caught the attention of Verticorp, a multinational with deep pockets. My phone lit up immediately, buzzing with notifications. I silenced the ringer and set it face down on the counter. Not today. I wouldn't let myself get pulled into conversations about market trajectories and capital gains taxes. I needed one damn day to just be. My laptop pinged with incoming emails. Most were congratulatory notes from former classmates and industry acquaintances who'd suddenly remembered my existence. Some were from investors who'd passed on us 3 years ago, now hoping to reconnect. Funny how success redraws the maps of relationships. I glanced at my phone again, noticing a voicemail notification. Unknown number. I pressed play and held it to my ear. Brody, it's me. Thalia's voice was hesitant, almost fragile. I just saw the news. I had no idea. Can we talk? Please call me back. I deleted it without replying. There was nothing left to discuss. My inbox refreshed with a new message from Paige Nolan. Subject line: Urgent. Updated financial disclosures required. The email was coldly professional, suggesting that the recent developments necessitated a review of our divorce settlement and requesting documentation of when the acquisition talks began. Delete. Block sender. My phone buzzed with a text. Blake Anderson's name appeared on the screen. Guess we picked the wrong time to leave, huh? Any chance we can discuss? I actually laughed out loud at that. Not a happy laugh, more like the sound you make when you've just witnessed something so pathetic it defies belief. I tapped block and set the phone down again. The doorbell rang at 7. I opened it to find Beatrice standing there holding up 2 bags of Chinese takeout. I figured you might need company tonight, she said, stepping inside. The vultures must be circling. You have no idea. I grabbed plates while she unpacked cartons of kung pao chicken and vegetable lo mein. Phone's been blowing up all day. Including from her? I nodded, scooping rice onto my plate. Voicemail asking to talk. Didn't bother calling back. Good. Beatrice stabbed a piece of chicken with her fork. And the lawyer. Wants updated disclosures, like I somehow hid the deal during divorce proceedings. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Calvin, briefcase in hand, looking more serious than usual. Sorry to intrude on dinner, he said, nodding to Beatrice. But I thought you'd want to know right away. Paige Nolan is making noise about filing a motion to set aside the divorce decree. I gestured for him to sit. On what grounds? Fraudulent concealment of assets. Calvin set his briefcase on the coffee table. It's nonsense, of course. The prenuptial agreement is airtight and the acquisition wasn't finalized until after she filed. Can they even do that? Beatrice asked. They can try. Calvin accepted the plate I offered him. But we have timeline evidence showing the deal wasn't completed until after Thalia initiated proceedings. Plus, your financial disclosures during the marriage were always meticulous. I rubbed my temples. I don't want this becoming some public spectacle. It won't, Calvin assured me. The court filings will become public record, which might attract some attention given the amounts involved. But if we keep our responses minimal and fact-based, the noise will die down quickly. Beatrice helped herself to more rice. What about Blake? He seemed pretty eager to jump ship when he thought you were broke. Now he's texting? Blocked him, I said. Both of them. Smart move. Calvin nodded. Maintain radio silence. Let them make all the noise while you focus on what matters. After dinner, Calvin reviewed our strategy one more time before leaving. Beatrice stayed to help clean up, her presence a welcome buffer against the day's chaos. You okay? She asked, drying the last plate. Getting there, I said and meant it. After Beatrice left, I sat in the dimming light of my living room, Onyx curled at my feet. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence more pronounced. But there was something cleansing about it too, like the quiet after a storm. At nearly 11, headlights swept across my front windows. A car door slammed. Footsteps approached my porch, followed by a firm knock. I peered through the peephole. Thalia stood on my doorstep, arms crossed against the night chill. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. What are you doing here? I asked. She looked smaller somehow, less certain than the woman who'd handed me divorce papers. I needed to see you. It's late, Thalia. You weren't supposed to move on this fast, she said, her voice catching. You were supposed to need more time. The comment struck me as so absurd that I almost laughed. I didn't move on, I replied quietly. I stopped waiting. Her eyes widened slightly. Good night, Thalia. I closed the door gently but firmly, then leaned against the frame, feeling my pulse steady itself. I walked back to the couch and sat down, exhaling slowly. When I glanced toward the door again, I noticed something white on the floor. I walked over and checked the peephole once more. The porch was empty, but Paige Nolan's business card had been slid under my door. 2 days after Thalia's surprise porch visit, I sat in Calvin's office, staring at a pile of legal papers that somehow weighed more than the oak table supporting them. They're really doing this, I said, flipping through the motion Paige had filed. Attempting to void a prenup we both signed before NovaWorks even existed. Calvin adjusted his glasses and nodded grimly. On grounds of concealment, yes, it's a stretch, but they're hoping for a sympathetic judge or, more likely, that you'll settle to avoid the hassle. Not happening. I pushed the papers back. What do you need from me? Everything. Bank logs, cap tables, board minutes. Anything that creates a clear timeline showing when the company valuation became significant, when the acquisition talks began, and most importantly, when the deal closed. I pulled out my phone and forwarded him all the emails I'd already compiled. There's the chronology. The rest will be in your inbox within the hour. Calvin began organizing documents into a thick binder with labeled dividers. As meticulous as a surgeon, he created sections for the prenup, annual disclosures, company formation, and acquisition timing. We need Sophia's input on this, I said. She was there for the board meetings where we first discussed potential buyers. Absolutely. Her testimony will strengthen our position considerably. I stepped out to call her. Sophia answered on the second ring. I heard, she said, skipping the hello. Paige Nolan's quite the opportunist. That's one word for it. I pinched the bridge of my nose. I need timestamps, Sophia. Notarized documentation showing when our equity positions were established and how the valuation changed after the separation. Already on it. I've got the board minutes from the last 2 years scanned and ready. And Brody. She paused. I've included screenshots of Thalia's social media from around the time you separated. Thought you should see what she was posting. Thanks, send it all to Calvin, please. After hanging up, I scrolled through Instagram, something I rarely did, and spotted what Sophia meant. Thalia had been checking in at Blake's gym almost daily for months before she handed me divorce papers. Recent posts showed them together again, planning strategy over coffee according to the caption. I showed Calvin. They're coordinating. He frowned at the screen. Let's add this to our evidence folder. It establishes motive. That evening, Beatrice came over with takeout again. We spread papers across my dining table, organizing disclosures and cross-referencing dates until nearly midnight. You sent her all this? Beatrice asked, holding up financial statements from 3 years prior, Every year, like clockwork. Calvin insisted on full transparency. I shuffled through another stack. She signed acknowledgments for each one. Beatrice shook her head. And now she's claiming you hid things. She's claiming whatever Paige tells her to claim. I stapled another set of documents together. When Blake realized there was no money coming, he pivoted to being her shoulder to cry on. Men like him don't stick around for the hard parts, Beatrice muttered. The mediation happened a week later in a sterile conference room downtown. Calvin and I sat on one side, Paige and Thalia on the other. Blake wasn't there. Probably couldn't spare the time from flexing in gym mirrors. My client was deliberately misled, Paige began, her voice sharp as a knife. Mr. Carson concealed the true value of his business interests during the marriage and deliberately timed the sale to deprive Mrs. Carson of her rightful share. The mediator looked at me. I met his gaze directly. The same disclosure documents Mrs. Carson claims never existed were delivered to her annually, with her signature acknowledging receipt. My voice stayed even. The acquisition talks began after she filed for divorce, and the deal closed after we separated. The timeline is irrefutable. Thalia wouldn't look at me. She stared at her hands, occasionally whispering to Paige. "This feels like retaliation," Paige said. Mrs. Carson made a good-faith decision to end an unhappy marriage. She couldn't have known that the company she called a hobby would succeed. I finished for her. That's not concealment, that's miscalculation. After 3 hours, we reached no agreement. The mediator scheduled a court hearing, looking apologetic as he closed his folder. Back home, I took the divorce decree from its envelope and pinned it to the refrigerator with a magnet. A reminder of what was real, what was final. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair where Thalia had placed the envelope that night. The house felt hollow, the tick of the wall clock marking time in a way I'd never noticed before. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Hearing confirmed, 8:30 a.m., Department 3A. I didn't recognize the assistant who had said it. The email address belonged to the court system, but something about the wording felt off, less like a standard court notification, and more like someone wanted to make sure I'd be there. The morning of the hearing brought rain, steady, insistent drops that streaked the courthouse windows like tears. I adjusted my tie in the reflection of the glass doors, watching people hurry past with umbrellas and rain-spotted briefcases. Calvin stood beside me reviewing notes one last time. "Remember," he said quietly, "truth doesn't need anger. Let the documentation speak." I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. I've got no reason to be angry. I just want this finished. We stepped into the courtroom at 8:15. The polished wood benches gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the judge's bench loomed large at the front. I caught the scent of lemon polish and old paper, the smell of decisions being made. Thalia and Paige arrived at 8:25, sliding into their seats across the aisle. Thalia wore a cream-colored blouse that made her look paler than usual. She glanced my way once, then fixed her eyes forward. Paige arranged folders with practiced efficiency, whispering something that made Thalia nod. At 8:30 sharp, the bailiff called, "All rise," and the judge entered, a woman in her 60s with silver-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense expression. She scanned the room, called our case number, and we began. Paige went first, standing with perfect posture as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, this case involves clear emotional manipulation and financial concealment," she began. Mrs. Carson entered divorce proceedings believing her husband's business was struggling, as he repeatedly indicated. Within days of finalizing their divorce, a massive acquisition was announced. This timing cannot be coincidence. I watched Thalia nod along, her eyes downcast, playing the wronged wife perfectly. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral. The judge looked over her glasses. "And your filing claims this violates the prenuptial agreement?" "We're asserting the prenuptial should be set aside due to fraud and misrepresentation," Paige said smoothly. Mrs. Carson would never have agreed to such minimal support had she known of the impending windfall. When Calvin rose, he moved with the unhurried confidence I'd always envied. "Your Honor, what we have is not a case of fraud, but of regret," he said, his voice steady. "We've prepared a timeline that clearly demonstrates the acquisition talks began after Mrs. Carson filed for divorce. The final valuation wasn't determined until after separation. He submitted the documents: our prenup, financial ledgers going back 5 years, annual disclosures with Thalia's signatures, Sophia's notarized timeline of the acquisition process. Then came the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating. Calvin introduced Exhibit D, Thalia's texts to Blake Anderson from 2 months before our split. "He'll never be more than middle class," Calvin read, his tone matter-of-fact. "I'm done wasting my looks on someone who can't see beyond his garage startup." The courtroom fell silent. I heard Thalia's sharp intake of breath. The judge frowned, studying the printouts. "And Mrs. Carson acknowledged receipt of all financial disclosures?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor. Her signature appears on all annual disclosure forms, as required by the prenuptial agreement." The judge studied the documents for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When she looked up, her gaze was direct. "The court finds no evidence of fraud or financial misconduct. The prenuptial agreement stands as written, Mrs. Carson received fair disclosure throughout the marriage, and the timing of the business acquisition after separation appears properly documented." She turned to Page. "Counsel, I would caution against further filings without substantial new evidence. This court doesn't look kindly on attempts to relitigate settled matters." It was over in less than an hour. No fireworks, no dramatic confessions, just the quiet victory of truth over fiction. I didn't look at Thalia as we left. Didn't need to. The click of her heels against the marble floor told me everything. Quick, angry steps retreating down the corridor. Calvin, Beatrice, and I ended up at a diner across from the courthouse. The coffee tasted burnt, but somehow perfect. "You're free of her reach now," Calvin said, stirring cream into his cup. The judge's ruling was unambiguous. I nodded without smiling. "It feels strange. Not victorious, just final." Beatrice squeezed my arm. "That's because you're not cruel, Brody. You just wanted what was fair." The next 3 days passed in a blur of paperwork and meetings. I started a small scholarship fund in my father's name, something I'd always wanted to do. I took Onyx for long walks. I slept without dreaming. Then the knock came. A deputy stood on my doorstep, rain dripping from his hat. "Brody Carson?" "That's me. I have documentation to serve you." He handed me a thick envelope. "Temporary restraining order. You're to remain at least 100 yards from the petitioner." My hands went cold as I accepted the paperwork. "Restraining order? On what grounds?" "It's all in there, sir. Court dates listed for the hearing. Have a good day." I closed the door and tore open the envelope. Thalia's statement leaped from the page. Threat to safety, intimidating behavior, fears for personal well-being. My eyes locked on the date of the alleged incident. It was from our scheduled handoff of Onyx last weekend, a 5-minute exchange in the parking lot of the pet store where we'd always bought his food. The lot with security cameras covering every corner. I threw some clothes and toiletries into a duffel bag, my movements mechanical. The restraining order felt like a physical weight in my pocket. Every few minutes I'd stop and try to process what was happening. Yesterday I'd won. Today, I was legally banned from my own home. "You don't have to leave," Beatrice said from the doorway, arms folded. "We could fight this right now. And risk an arrest for violating a court order?" I zipped the bag closed. "Not worth it. Calvin says it's temporary, just until the hearing." "This is insane, Brody. You didn't threaten anyone." I paused, replaying the dog handoff in my mind. The parking lot had been nearly empty that evening. Thalia had shown up with Blake in tow, a clear violation of our agreement to come alone. Blake had started with the comments immediately. "Look at the big shot picking up his mutt," he'd said, smirking. "Still playing house?" I'd ignored him, focusing instead on Onyx, who strained at the leash to reach me. Thalia had held the leash too tight, making Onyx whine. "Could you ease up?" I'd asked her. "You're hurting him." "Don't tell me how to handle my dog," she'd snapped. "Our dog," I'd corrected. "And I'm not telling you how to do anything. I'm just here for the scheduled exchange." That's when Blake had stepped closer, chest puffed. "Maybe you should worry about your own life instead of ours." I remember looking at both of them, Thalia's defiant stare, Blake's aggressive stance, and feeling nothing but a deep, settled calm. "You're ruining yourselves," I'd said quietly. "And you're doing it without any help from me." That was it. No raised voices, no threats. Just a simple truth they didn't want to hear. "Beatrice," I said now, "could you keep Onyx for me until this is sorted? I don't trust them not to try something with him." She nodded. "Of course. And Hector's expecting you?" "Yeah. Called him on the way home from court." I drove to Hector's apartment across town, the streetlights blurring through a light drizzle. His place was small but comfortable, with the lingering scent of engine oil and the coffee he brewed too strong. "Temporary, man," he said, clearing space on his couch. "That's the key word here." "Thanks for this," I told him. "I know it's an imposition." He waved me off. "Remember when my transmission blew and I slept on your floor for a week? This is nothing." I didn't sleep much that night. Around 5:30 a.m., my phone rang. "Calvin." "I've got it," he said without preamble. "The security footage from the pet store. Manager opened early for me." My heart rate quickened. "And?" "It's exactly as you described. Audio's a bit weak, but the body language is clear. Blake steps toward you aggressively. You remain still. No threatening gestures whatsoever." I exhaled slowly. That's good. It's better than good. It's exculpatory. The hearing's at 11. Meet me at my office at 9 to review. 2 hours later, I watched the footage on Calvin's laptop. There we were, me standing quietly, Thalia holding Onyx's leash too tight, and Blake stepping forward with his hands clenched. My posture remained open, non-threatening. The audio wasn't perfect, but you could clearly hear my calm, "You're ruining yourselves," followed by me turning to leave. "This changes everything," I said. Calvin nodded. "Page filed this knowing it was false. That's serious misconduct." The hearing was brief and decisive. The judge reviewed the footage twice, then looked at Thalia and Page with undisguised disappointment. "The court is vacating this temporary restraining order immediately," she announced. "Not only is there no evidence of threats or intimidation by Mr. Carson, but the footage suggests the opposite scenario entirely." She turned to Page. "Counsel, I am deeply troubled by what appears to be an abuse of process. This court will be referring this matter to the Bar Association for review." Thalia's face drained of color. Page stammered something about client representations and acting in good faith, but the judge wasn't having it. "We're adjourned," she said firmly. Outside in the hallway, Calvin clapped my shoulder. "Go get your dog. Go home." The clouds were breaking up as I drove to Beatrice's place. Onyx practically knocked me over when I came through the door, his whole body wiggling with excitement. "See?" Beatrice said, smiling. "He knew you'd be back." The drive home felt like crossing a finish line. I unlocked the door, let Onyx bound inside, and followed him into the quiet house that was mine again. I hung his leash on the hook by the door where it had always been, fed him his dinner, and sent Calvin a simple text. "Thank you." Later, sitting at my dining table, the same one where Thalia had slid that envelope across to me months ago, I felt something solid and steady settle in my chest. Not happiness exactly. Resolve. I powered down my laptop about to head to bed, when a notification flashed across the screen. Paige Nolan mentioned in disciplinary docket, preliminary inquiry opened. The next week unfolded in a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar, like rediscovering an old song. Each morning began with Onyx and me walking the trail that looped behind the neighborhood, his nose to the ground, my eyes on the horizon. The air still held that early spring chill that made my breath visible in small disappearing clouds. I settled into a routine that felt like mine again, working remotely from the dining room table, conference calls with the transition team, spreadsheets that mapped the future instead of the wreckage of the past. Some evenings, Beatrice would drop by with takeout, but most nights it was just Onyx and me, the television a quiet murmur in the background. "This is what healing looks like," I told Onyx as he curled against my feet under the table. Quiet. Unspectacular. Thursday evening I was loading the dishwasher when I heard the distinct crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Onyx lifted his head, ears perked. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the kitchen window I caught the outline of a familiar sedan, Thalia's car. My stomach tightened. I dried my hands and walked to the front door, opening it before she could knock. She stood on the porch alone, clutching a thin folder, her makeup smudged around the eyes like she'd been crying and tried to fix it in the car. "Brody," she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Sure." She walked past me, the scent of her perfume, the one I'd given her last Christmas, trailing behind her. Onyx approached cautiously, and she bent to scratch behind his ears. "He looks good," she said. "Healthy." I nodded. "He is." She straightened, glancing around the living room. "The place looks the same. What do you need, Thalia?" She took a deep breath. "Blake left 2 weeks ago. She paused, swallowing hard. "He was only there for what he thought I was getting from you." I wasn't surprised, but I didn't say so. "I made a mistake, Brody. A terrible mistake." Her voice cracked. "I was wondering if we could talk about starting over." I gestured toward the dining table, the same one where she'd slid those divorce papers to me months ago. "Have a seat." She sat, placing the folder in front of her. I took the chair across from her where I'd sat that night, listening to her explain why our marriage wasn't worth continuing. "I've been so lonely," she began, her fingers fidgeting with the folder's edge. "The apartment feels empty. There's no porch for coffee in the morning, no you." She looked up, eyes searching mine. "I miss us. The way we were before everything got complicated." I let her talk. She spoke about the quiet moments she missed, about realizing too late what she'd thrown away, about how Blake had shown his true colors when the money vanished. I listened without interruption, without nodding, without giving her any sign of what I was thinking. When she finally fell silent, I spoke. "You ended this, Thalia." "I know," she whispered. "But can't we?" "You ended this," I repeated, "because you thought the man you married wasn't worth your time anymore. Those were your choices, your words." She reached across the table for my hand. I withdrew it, placing both palms flat on the table surface. "Are you seeing someone?" she asked, her voice tight. "I'm seeing the truth," I replied. "For the first time in a long time." Her eyes welled up again. "Brody, please. Everyone makes mistakes." I stood up. "Yes, they do. And everyone lives with the consequences." She remained seated, looking up at me with those eyes that used to melt my resolve. "Not anymore." "I'll walk you out," I said. She gathered her folder, whatever it contained, she never opened it, and followed me to the door. On the porch, she turned to face me one last time. "I still love you," she whispered. I looked at her for a long moment, seeing not just the woman before me, but all the versions of her I'd known. The one who laughed at my dreams, the one who walked away when she thought I had nothing, the one who came back when she realized I had everything. "You love what you lost," I said quietly. "Not who I am." I closed the door before she could respond. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Onyx snoring softly at the foot of the mattress. The conversation with Thalia felt unfinished, not because I had more to say to her, but because I hadn't yet said it in a way that would close this chapter for good. She would be back, and next time I needed to end things on my terms. I reached for my phone in the darkness, opening a new message. To Thalia. "We need to have one final conversation. Meet me at the old house dining table tomorrow at 7 p.m. My thumb hovered over send for a long moment. I woke early the next morning, my body tense with anticipation. After my usual run with Onyx, I sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee, waiting for Beatrice. When her car pulled into my driveway, something in my chest loosened. Just a little. "Hey, big brother," she said, settling beside me with her own travel mug. The morning air was cool, with that heavy feeling that signals approaching rain. "You look like you didn't sleep." I didn't. I took a sip of coffee. "Thalia showed up yesterday." Beatrice's eyebrows shot up. What did she want? Blake left her when he realized she wasn't getting any money. Now she wants to start over. Beatrice scoffed. "Of course she does." I ran my thumb along the rim of my mug. "I didn't send that text last night, but I'm going to. I need to finish this, B, completely." "What are you planning?" Her eyes narrowed with concern. "I'm meeting her at the old house tonight. One conversation, face to face. No lawyers, no games. Just the truth." Beatrice nodded slowly. "Want me there?" Yes, I admitted. Just wait in the living room, in case it goes sideways. Of course, she said, bumping my shoulder with hers. That's what sisters are for. My phone buzzed with Calvin's name on the screen. I put it on speaker. Morning, Brody. Just wanted to update you. There's a formal bar inquiry into Paige Nolan now. The judge's referral stuck. What does that mean? Beatrice asked. It means Ms. Nolan has some explaining to do about filing a restraining order with no evidence, Calvin replied. Could impact her license. After we hung up, I pulled out my phone again and drafted the text to Thalia. We need one final conversation. Meet me at the old house tonight at 7. Come alone. My finger hovered over the send button for a moment before pressing it. The message delivered with a soft whoosh that felt too quiet for what it represented. Her reply came within minutes. I'll be there. Thank you, Brody. The day crawled by. At 6, Beatrice and I drove to the house I'd shared with Thalia. I'd kept it after the divorce but hadn't moved back in. It sat empty, a shell of memories I wasn't ready to face daily. The furniture remained, covered with sheets like ghosts of our former life. You sure about this? Beatrice asked as we walked through the front door. I nodded. It needs to be here. Where it all started. In the dining room, I pulled off the sheet covering the table. The same table where Thalia had slid those divorce papers toward me. I set 2 glasses of water on its surface and took a seat facing the door. Beatrice squeezed my shoulder before retreating to the living room just out of sight but within earshot. At exactly 7, headlights swept across the front windows. The doorbell rang. I rose, steadied myself, and walked to the door. Thalia stood on the porch, hair pulled back, wearing a simple blue dress. She looked like she'd lost weight. Thank you for seeing me, she said, stepping inside. The house still recognized her scent. Or maybe I did. We sat at the table across from each other. Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating the room in stark white. I'm sorry, she began. I was scared, Brody. The company wasn't taking off. We were using our savings and I panicked. I said nothing. Blake made me feel secure when everything else felt unstable. Her fingers twisted together on the tabletop. But it wasn't real. What we had, what you and I built, that was real. Thunder growled in the distance. I know I hurt you, she continued. I know I can't just walk back in and expect everything to be the same. But we could start over. Build something new. She reached across the table, not quite touching my hand. Please, Brody, give us another chance. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but clarity. You didn't love me, Thalia, I said, my voice even. You loved the life you imagined I'd build. When that life didn't materialize fast enough, you decided I wasn't worth the wait. That's not... It is. I cut her off gently. You said it yourself in those texts to Blake. You are done wasting your looks on someone who would never be more than middle class. She flinched. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You get nothing more from me. No money. No sympathy, no second chance. Brody, please. You chose this story, Thalia. When you pushed those papers across this table, you wrote the ending. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I made a mistake. Yes, I agreed. And now you're living with it. I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. She remained seated, shoulders shaking. Is this really it? She whispered. After 7 years together? You ended those 7 years. I stepped toward the hallway and gave a small nod to Beatrice, who appeared in the doorway. We're done here. Thalia saw my sister and wiped her tears quickly. You brought backup? I brought a witness, I corrected her. She gathered her purse and stood. For a moment, she looked like she might try to touch me, but something in my face stopped her. She walked to the door without another word. Thunder rolled directly overhead as she stepped onto the porch. Rain began to fall in heavy drops as she hurried to her car in the driveway. I locked the door behind her and set the house key on the table. Looking at it lying there, cold and final, I realized the door would never open for Thalia again. 2 months later, I laced up my hiking boots and clipped Onyx's leash to his collar. The morning air had that crisp, promising quality that makes you breathe a little deeper. I filled a thermos with fresh coffee, strong and black the way I'd always liked it, and tucked it into my backpack. Ready, buddy? I asked. Onyx's tail wagged in eager circles. He knew the routine now. Every Sunday morning, we'd climb the ridge trail that overlooked the valley. It had become our thing, just the two of us, the trees, and whatever thoughts decided to keep us company. The trail started steep, meandering through a stand of pines that gave way to an open ridge. Onyx trotted ahead of me, occasionally looking back as if to check I was still following. When we reached the outlook point, I unclipped his leash and let him explore while I settled on a flat boulder. I poured coffee into the thermos cup, steam rising in the cool air. From up here, the town looked peaceful. Toy houses and miniature streets, problems reduced to the size of ants. I took a long sip and felt the warmth spread through my chest. Later that day, I'd be hosting Sunday breakfast. Another new tradition. Beatrice and Mom would arrive around 11 and we'd cook together, swapping stories and laughing in ways I'd forgotten were possible during those darker months. Last week, Mom had brought old photos of Dad teaching me to fish, and we'd spent hours reminiscing without the shadow of loss hanging quite so heavy. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Calvin's name flashed on the screen. "Morning," I answered. "It's official," he said without preamble. Paige Nolan received a 6-month suspension from the bar. Ethical misconduct. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Good. You don't sound surprised." "Actions have consequences," I said simply. She pushed too far. After we hung up, I sat with that news for a while. There was no satisfaction in someone else's downfall, only a quiet acknowledgement that balance had been restored. I'd been busy in other ways. Last month, I'd set up a scholarship in my father's name, anonymous exactly how he would have wanted it. It would help kids from our old neighborhood study computer science. Dad had always believed in building things that outlasted you. Onyx returned to my side, panting happily. I scratched behind his ears and offered him water from my cupped hand. "Time to head back," I told him. "We've got company coming." On the drive home, I passed near the freeway, a route I rarely took anymore. Without thinking about it, I found myself turning down the street where Thalia had rented after everything fell apart. Her apartment was on the second floor of a beige complex, identifiable by the small balcony lined with plants. She was outside, watering those plants. Her hair was pulled back, her movements methodical. She didn't see me, and I didn't slow down. There was no anger left, just a distant recognition of someone I used to know. I continued driving, tuning the radio to a classic rock station my dad had loved. When I pulled into my driveway, the scent of fresh cedar greeted me. Hector and I had spent the previous weekend building a new deck off the back porch. Honest work with our hands that left us sore but satisfied. The wood still released its earthy perfume in the sun. "How was the hike?" Beatrice asked when she arrived with Mom an hour later. "Good. Clear day up there." Mom touched my cheek with a cool hand. "You look better," she said. Settled. After breakfast, they left with promises to return next Sunday. I spent the rest of the day reading and tinkering with old code. Not for profit, just for the pleasure of solving problems. As dusk settled in, I made tea and carried it out to the porch. Onyx followed, settling his weight against the porch rail with a contented sigh. The neighborhood grew quiet except for distant children's voices and the occasional car passing. "Some things are worth losing to find yourself again," I said softly to the evening air. Onyx's ears perked up as if he understood. I went inside to answer the kettle's whistle, leaving the porch door ajar. When I returned with a steaming mug, I paused at the threshold. Porch lights had begun to glow up and down the street, warm beacons in the gathering darkness. Standing there, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. This peace wasn't temporary. It wasn't waiting to be disrupted by the next crisis or confrontation. It was permanent because the boundary was permanent. I had drawn that line, and I would keep it drawn. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.